Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States.
I think it's a badge of honor.
It's not real. I don't think he's guilty of anything.
You know, it's not really real insanity, isn't it?
Every time they file an indictment, we go way up in the polls.
The more you indict, the more we vote. We're going to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's absolute bullshit. This is the only way that the Democrats have to beat President Trump.
One more indictment, and this election is closed out. Nobody has even a chance.
This month, former President Donald Trump faced his third criminal indictment of the year, this time for inciting the Capitol riots on January 6th and defrauding the U.S. government, among other things. In March, he was indicted for falsifying business records in connection with hush money he allegedly ordered to be paid to porn star Stormy Daniels. And in June, he was indicted in Miami for the willful retention of defense information, among other things, in connection with the classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. And a fourth indictment seems likely right around the corner and will be announced out of Fulton County, Georgia, as soon as next month, in connection with that phone call he made after the 2020 election. Remember the one trying to get them to conveniently find 11,000 votes so he could win the state? Multiple criminal charges, a history of romantic and financial infidelity, more bankruptcy declarations under his belt than you can count, a pathological liar. And yet with each new indictment, the party of law and order and of good Christian values is closer than ever to nominating Donald Trump as their frontrunner yet again. And with each new indictment, Trump gets a surge of support at the polls and in his pocket as he leverages the witch hunt against him to fire up his base of supporters, mostly working class folks, to give him, a millionaire, their money. The reason for Trump's initial rise to power in 2016 and his continued status as the most behemoth figure in Republican politics today is based on a number of things, from disinformation to a rise in populist fascism around the world to mass manipulation, the likes of which are typically reserved for cults and mind control. This is why America can't seem to shake the cult of Donald Trump. Roll the intro. Asking me where I get my glasses, and the answer is Warby Parker. So I'm super excited to be partnering with Warby Parker for today's video. Warby Parker offers everything you need to keep those peepers happy, including eyeglasses, sunglasses, contact lenses, and yes, even eye exams at one of its 190 retail locations across the US. Glasses start at $95, including prescription lenses. And what's cool is you don't have to guess or go anywhere to try anything on. You can try Warby Parker's free at-home try-on kit. You order 5 pairs of glasses to try on at home for free. There's no obligation to buy, the kit ships to your doorstep for free and includes a prepaid return shipping label. I got my free at-home try-on kit and I'm gonna try on some glasses for you right now. I'm trying some fun colors this time. You tell me which ones you like best. First we have, greens. I was kind of hoping this would bring out my eye color. And then I have this kind of maroonish red, which I think is just kind of edgy and fun, like with a dark lip. Can you picture it? Or how about these kind of almost amber colored glasses? Ooh, I like these. The brownish. I've been in such like a beige and brown mood lately. These fit really well with that vibe. Or we have amber, but like more see-through. These are a little bit wider. What's cool is you can choose different widths depending on the width of your face. These are really comfortable. And then finally, these ones are cool. They have little like flecks of blue in them, like a tortoise shell, but with blue. These are pretty fun and arty, if you ask me. And at Warby Parker, you can save 15% when you order 2 or more pairs of prescription eyeglasses or sunglasses. So order your free at-home try-on kit today. Thanks, Warby Parker. Understanding how we got here requires us to take a dive, as usual, into history to discover both who these people are that continue to support Trump, but also who Trump is, how the myth of him took hold and allowed him to grow to power in the first place. Donald Trump was born on June 14th, 1946. He is, say it with me, a Gemini, classic. His father, Fred Trump, was a real estate developer, and after Donnie Trump somehow managed to graduate from college with a degree in economics, despite having seemingly never read a book one once ever in his entire life, he then joined Daddy managing apartment complexes in Queens and Brooklyn in the 1970s. By 1973, they were charged with violating the Fair Housing Act by actively discriminating against black tenants. That won't stop them, though. Next, they bought the Commodore Hotel, revamped it, and reopened it as the Grand Hyatt Hotel, kicking off Trump's career as a Manhattan developer. By 1987, Trump solidified his reputation as a businessman, as the Ken doll whose job is business, when he wrote his first book, The Art of the Deal, which became a bestseller. He was so good at doing deals and being business that by 1990, he was nearly $1 billion in personal debt, though he managed to slither his way out of that one somehow. Then he did more business, filing for bankruptcy for the Trump Taj Mahal in 1991 and the Trump Plaza and Castle casinos in 1992. And while he was businessing around, he was also thinking, business is cool, but what is one step above businessman? Oh yeah, president. And in 1999, he went on Larry King to say that he's planning on challenging Pat Buchanan for the Reform Party nomination for president. When that didn't work in 2000, he said never mind, and then decided, you know what, I am such business that I should probably star in a show about businessman. And The Apprentice was born.
I was billions of dollars in debt, but I fought back and I won. Big league. I used my brain, I used my negotiating skills, and I worked it all out. And as the master, I want to pass along my knowledge to somebody else. I'm looking for The Apprentice.
By this point, Trump had solidified himself in popular culture as a Manhattan millionaire playboy, with frequent cameos on movies and TV, including in Home Alone 2, Sex and the City, The Fresh Prince, The Nanny, The Little Rascals, and Zoolander. To such an extent that in 2000, The Simpsons, in one of its many prescient moments, showed a future where Trump was president. Writer Dan Greaney said in 2016, what we needed was for Lisa to have problems beyond her fixing, that everything went as bad as it possibly could be, and that's why we had Trump be president before her. That just seemed like the logical last stop before hitting bottom. It was consistent with the vision of America going insane. So Trump as president, as outlandish as it seemed to most of us when he announced his run for 2016, wasn't completely out of thin air. And the political atmosphere was shockingly ripe for his picking. The Washington Post has aptly tied Trump's rise to power to the 2008 financial crisis. When Obama was elected, one of the first things he did was pass a massive stimulus bill to address the recession, adding to the national debt and bailing out big businesses while working class people suffered and lost their jobs and their homes. Democrats subsequently experienced major losses in the 2010 midterm elections as a result of this backlash. During this time, the US also saw the growth of the Tea Party movement, the first murmurs of what was to come with MAGA and the alt-right, and a group that picked up speed as a backlash to Obama's election and progressive policies grew. It was a political movement that, thanks to the then only decade-old internet, was able to consolidate and proliferate its ideas on a scale never seen before, so that once isolated groups of people with fringe beliefs were able to communicate and collaborate for the first time. This is the group that housed the birthers, who were convinced that Obama wasn't a citizen, and used fear tactics to foment conspiracy theories and activate the conservative base to vote. But they weren't strong enough to take the White House. After losing again in 2012, the Republicans took a step back to look at what they were doing wrong. Because, as we've discussed in previous videos, politics isn't what's best for America or what your constituents actually want. It's about figuring out which one or two wedge issues their base will get riled up enough about to show up to the polls for. A Republican Growth and Opportunity Project report from 2012 showed that Republicans needed to champion comprehensive immigration reform. Add to that the loss of the gay marriage fight in 2015 and the ongoing fervor over abortion, and you had yourself a slew of wedge issues that got conservatives riled up. And Trump said exactly what it took to do just that. As early as 2011, Trump was on Good Morning America questioning whether Obama was born in the US. In June 2015, when he announced he was running for president, he said he would implement policies to boost the economy and get tough on immigration. A few months later, calling for a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. And his ability, despite being an out-of-touch millionaire, to speak to his base of working-class supporters and make them feel heard and seen really resonated. He was saying the racist shit that they think is the truth, tying immigration to the economic losses they had been experiencing since the Great Recession, when they watched big businesses receive handouts from the government and lost their jobs, while also seeing black and brown folks and immigrants sometimes succeeding, even though they thought that they were here first and they deserved to win. Trump was there giving them easy answers to the problems they were facing. And honestly, this is just sales 101, people. When you're trying to sell someone something, they gotta know, like, and trust you. You have to address their objections and and tell them why you are the solution. And you need to speak in a language they understand so that they feel like they're being seen and heard, and that you will deliver the answer to the problem they need solved. Whether you're selling microwaves, developing real estate, or running for president, it's all in the art of the deal. And despite his many failures in business, Trump managed to figure it out this time. And if you're able to manipulate people into knowing, liking, and trusting you enough, no matter where you go and what shit you peddle, they'll be there to hand you all their money. And no one in politics has managed to develop such a strong customer base as Trump. They're ready to buy whatever he's selling. But who actually are the people who support Trump? Well, due in part to the fact that many of his most fervent supporters are anti-establishment conspiracy theorists who don't trust the media or politicians, getting them to respond to polls about politicians by the media is pretty impossible. But based on the population that does actually respond to polls, we know that those who voted for Trump in 2020 were 85% white. 58% were non-college educated whites, and 15% were voters of color, including 8% Latinos. Polls show that the less educated you were, the more likely you were to vote for Trump. And the older you were, the more likely you were to vote for Trump. And the more rural your town, the more likely you were to vote for Trump. And the more money you made, the more likely you were to vote for Trump. None of this is surprising given what we know about what divides us as a country, but it doesn't fully explain the level of fervent loyalty. Recent polling by NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist found that 64% of Republicans said they wanted Trump to be president again, even if he was found guilty of a crime. Trump has managed to condition his supporters to believe that any legal challenge against him is invalid and a product of some conspiracy or the deep state trying to persecute truth-tellers like him, and by extension, his supporters. Berkeley scholars have found that Trump won with an unexpected coalition of white working-class and middle-class voters who were motivated by resentment. The culture and economy gave them no recognition and no respect for their work. Their jobs were shifting overseas or lost to automation. They perceived that Black, Latina, and Asian people and immigrants are advancing at their expense. How do his supporters, who are more likely to be Christian and to value law and order, rectify their beliefs that their support of a proven adulterer, compulsive liar, millionaire tax cheat, and now multiple times charged criminal defendant?
Trump is blocking witnesses.
I don't care.
Oh.
The answer lies less in politics or logic and more in populism, mind control, and cults. According to scholar of 20th century authoritarian politics 𝗬𝗓𝗏𝗧, Trump differed from past heads of state of either party in having zero interest in public welfare or consensus politics. His goals were autocratic, amassing power, domesticating the GOP, and having his financial and other personal interests prevail over national ones in shaping domestic and foreign policy. His presidency was unprecedented in the United States, but we've seen this before elsewhere in history. Juan Perón ruled over Argentina after a coup in 1943 and stated him as the head of a military dictatorship. However, by 1946, fascism was really not cool anymore, so fascist rulers were like, rats, we need a rebrand. And they saw democratic elections as a means of legitimizing their rule. So in 1946, he ran on a populist ticket, winning the presidential election in Argentina and becoming the first populist leader in history to come to power. Perón's populism shared some pretty foggy gray areas with fascism. For example, he didn't like liberal politics, he denounced ruling elites, undercut the legitimacy of independent journalism, espoused a deep dislike of pluralism and political tolerance, and cultivated a cult of personality that allowed him to be democratically elected despite his decidedly undemocratic authoritarian principles. Sound familiar? Other populist leaders came to power, blurring the lines of democracy and pushing their countries closer to autocracy and fascism. Leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil, Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, promote their own version of history, fomenting a distrust in government and in their country's collective understanding of their own history to create an alternate reality where they can rule legitimately while simultaneously promoting undemocratic authoritarian objectives. Professor Yascha Mounk at Johns Hopkins University defines a fundamental through line of populist thinking that includes a way of thinking about the world that holds that the only reason we have problems is because of a political leader that is corrupt and self-serving, cares more about various outsiders than they do about real people. And to fix these problems, a single individual who truly represents the people needs to be elected so that they can do away with the corruption, seize back power from entrenched elites, and get rid of anyone who stands in the way of the will of the people. This involves two key elements. Anti-elitism, meaning that there's something wrong with the people in charge, privilege, and anti-pluralism, meaning that one leader alone represents the will of the people, and if you disagree with that person, you're illegitimate and you're a traitor to the people and must be taken down. And these ideas pose a fundamental threat to liberal democratic ideals of collective self-determination, meaning rule by the people, as well as individual rights and freedoms, including independent institutions like the media and separate checks and balances on presidential power. Two ways to further the populist cause and curb these perceived threats to the will of the populist leader is to foment distrust in the media and undermine the independence of the judiciary. To claim as the leader that you are the only one who can speak on behalf of the people. To be willing to push the confines of what's legal to the max in order to maintain power. And to be very adept at providing very simple answers to people's problems. The reason you don't have a job is because of immigrants. The reason you can't get ahead is because of affirmative action. The reason why drug use in your community is growing is because of black people, etc. It's an us versus them mentality that posits that if you are not behind this leader, the one that speaks for the will of the people, then you're against us and we must take you out. It's truly wild to read about scholars dissecting the populism playbook because it makes me really question my theory that Trump is illiterate because he follows it to a T in a way that seems too scholarly and accurate to be by happenstance. As Professor 𝗬𝗠𝗧𝗧, who studies philosophy and political science, put it, it is an intrinsic danger in modern democracies that for many reasons, the erosion of the working class, the creation of a lot of people who feel declassed and not taken seriously in the globalized world, it is likely that pressure towards authoritarianism will increase everywhere. 𝗬𝗧𝗧 points to 2016 as the year when this turn towards global authoritarianism picked up momentum. It was the year of the Brexit referendum, an attempted coup in Turkey, the election in the Philippines of a president who openly bragged that he would kill criminals and then pardon himself, and the election of Donald Trump, who openly bragged he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get away with it. The United States was recently added to the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance list of backsliding democracies. And the most obvious outcome of this rise in populism, where the cult of one leader trumps everything else, including logic, reason, and fundamental democratic ideals, is highly polarized countries. And this polarization can have devastating consequences for democracy because it creates a country and an electorate obsessed with an us versus them mentality, with half of the population willing to follow a man who has claimed he's the chosen one. As Professor Jennifer Chapman puts it, he said he's super smart, a genius. He's established his image as the leader who is cleaning up Washington and the savior of the common person so convincingly that none of his supporters are looking beyond that to see that, in fact, many of the things he's doing are exactly the opposite. But that doesn't matter to a Trump supporter. And I think the reason for this is in part because he's established himself as a populist leader who represents the will of true Americans. But it's more than that. As one recent article out of Berkeley said, Trump followers exhibit a loyalty to Trump that is so intense and so unshakable that it exerts a cult-like gravity. In addition to the fact that Trump has openly courted cults like QAnon to such an extent that 56% of Republicans believe that the absolutely bizarre conspiracies being touted by QAnon are somewhat or entirely true, Trump himself has taken a cue from the behavior of cults and cult leaders in how he has implanted himself in the psyche of half of the electorate. Stephen Hassan is a mind control expert, mental health professional, and spent 2.5 years in the Mooney cult before being deprogrammed. He wrote a book called The Cult of Donald Trump, and drew some stark lines between cults and the following Trump has amassed. For one, a cult usually involves a venerated leader, someone who's considered king or godlike. Everyone's falling over themselves to praise the leader and be in the leader's good graces. They use loaded language that's evocative and creates a strong image in people's minds, while also being incredibly vague and lacking a clear definition, goal, or outcome that's based in reality. For example, lock her up, fake news, witch hunt, build the wall, the deep state, and make America great again. Cults thrive where its members are sleep deprived and bombarded with information overload, especially in silos where they're not receiving any information other than that which is being created and promoted by the cult. But Hassan is not the only person to draw links between Trump's followers and cult-like behavior. Robert Reich, for Now This, has also drawn the comparison, noting Trump's intolerance for criticism and dissent. And anyone who does take issue with Trump is called a liar, a traitor, a phony. Trump's tactics are also culty because he claims, and his supporters genuinely believe, that Trump alone knows the truth, using fear as a key ingredient to foment blind loyalty and consolidate his base. This, all while actively and publicly doing things against the interests of his supporters and in complete opposition to his promises, like cutting Medicare and Medicaid, lining billionaires' pockets, filling his cabinets with entrenched corporate executives and lobbyists who are arguably some of the deadliest crocodiles in the swamp he's claiming to drain. One tool experts use to diagnose the severity of cult-like behavior is the 𝗬𝗢 model, which is an acronym that stands for behavior, information, thoughts, and emotional control. If we look at the factors in each, a number of them stand out. Under the B for behavior, one important tactic is major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and/or self-indoctrination, including the internet. Under I for information, notable tactics include use of deception, minimizing or discouraging access to non-cult sources of information, and compartmentalization of information, meaning categorizing ideas and doctrines as either insider or outsider ways of thinking, and extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda. Under T for thoughts, notable tactics include requiring cult members to internalize the group's doctrine as the one and only truth, using loaded language and cliches to construct knowledge, stop critical thoughts, and reduce complexities into platitudes and buzzwords, manipulating memories and creating false memories. Make America great again? What does that mean? When are we talking? Great for whom? It doesn't make sense. Also, rejecting rational analysis, critical thinking, or constructive criticism, forbidding critical questions about the cult leader, doctrine, or policy, and labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate, evil, or not useful. And then finally, E for emotional control includes tactics like instilling fear in the cult members, including irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning the leader's authority. This threat of shunning is an incredibly powerful tool, as cult members have often distanced themselves from everyone in their life before the cult, so they have no one, and they have placed the entirety of their lives and personalities in this cult. It explains why, for example, sons are willing to turn their own fathers in for participating in the January 6th insurrection. They were too far gone, they'd pushed away their own families, and there was a distinct difference between their life, actions, and beliefs before Trump and after Trump. All of these tactics have been used to certain degrees throughout Trump's campaigns and presidency, and they continue to unite a shocking number of people. One thing that struck me in all of these tactics is the importance of information and controlling the narrative via the information that cult members consume. This is a huge part of Trump's tactics, made all the easier because of the siloing of people by political party in this country. If he wants to control the narrative for his base, all he has to do is post on Truth Social or call Fox News, and he's reached pretty much all of them. Internet conspiracy theories then do the rest. He's masterfully used the media in ways that would make any cult leader proud. Trump has employed all of these tactics and then some, leading his followers to believe that every bad thing that happened while Trump was president was not because of his policies, but in spite of them. That he's an innocent man forever being framed. He's capitalized on the us versus them mentality, causing his base to catastrophize the threats of the left into existential dangers that require a literal uprising to overcome.
The Democrats are guilty.
By an illegal faction of our government, aka the Biden administration.
You're gonna start a damn war, Joe Biden.
If they infringe upon what is yours.
Biden would have gotten elected if the votes were real.
We have got to wake up and fight. Fight like you've never fought before.
And at this point, 8 years into Trump as candidate and president, his supporters are so entrenched that even if, on the off chance, someone were to get through to them to make them care about logic and show them the illogical nature of their beliefs, they're too far gone. As a recent article in The Atlantic put it, for Trump supporters to call him out would be to call out themselves, and that's too painful for too many people. The greater the ethical compromises we make, the fiercer our justifications become, and the angrier and more frustrated we get at those who won't go along for the ride. Essentially, half of America has signed a deal with the devil in aligning itself with Trump, with the hate and resentment he espouses and proliferates, and now must double down because it's too painful to admit they were wrong. And this is the case for Trump supporters both in the electorate and in the government. His ideology has pushed the GOP so far to the right that anyone who's moderate or, just generally somewhat sane within the GOP has been alienated or forced to concede to the far-right faction. This is evidenced reinforced by the general lack of condemnation of Trump despite his behavior and his 3, almost 4 criminal indictments. The cult of Donald Trump is so strong that anyone who wants a political future within the GOP is afraid to criticize him. Even DeSantis, the man running against him for president, knows that to be overly critical of him would be a death sentence. Polls show DeSantis doesn't really have a chance of getting the nomination over Trump at this point, but his numbers likely would be even lower if he was actively railing against Trump, which is typical of most political rivalries. And in the scenario where we have a 2020 redo, a Trump versus Biden race in 2024, polls are currently showing Trump and Biden in a dead heat for the White House. But who knows what that'll look like in 15 months when we're actually at the voting booths. 15 more months of legal actions against Trump. 15 more months of him using those indictments and prosecutions to his advantage, to further his narrative that he and, by extension, his followers are being persecuted by the deep state, and that he and he alone is the savior, much like Jesus, who must rise again to fight for his people. With each indictment, he gains in the polls and increases his budget with a pouring in of donations. And he's continuing to manipulate the media in all his usual ways, posting recently on Truth Social that this is nothing more than the latest corrupt chapter in the continued, pathetic attempt by the Biden crime family and their weaponized Department of Justice to interfere with the 2024 presidential election, in which President Trump is the undisputed frontrunner and leading by substantial margins. The statement went on to compare the legal actions against Trump, and thereby against his supporters, with Nazi Germany. Which is ironic given what we know about how closely populism and fascism like to dance, but yeah, sure. And he's repeating his playbook from 2020 by alleging that he is the undisputed frontrunner and leading by substantial margins. That's factually inaccurate, but it doesn't matter. Not to his supporters, at least. And this is what he did over and over again before the 2020 election. And it got his followers amped up and scared to such a degree that they were willing to attempt to overthrow the government for it. Keep an eye out for him trying to delegitimize voting methods like mail-in ballots and drop boxes. That's the next step from his 2020 playbook. And who knows what'll happen in January 2025 if he once again loses to Biden. The Washington Post recently gave me some heartening news in that the 3 main tactics that Trump relied on to try to overturn the 2020 election are no longer available to him. For one thing, in 2020, he tried to replace electors in key states via Republican-controlled state legislatures, based on the absolutely batshit independent state legislatures doctrine that says basically that the Constitution gives state legislatures more power than the federal government to determine how elections are managed. The Supreme Court did away with that doctrine this year in their Moore v. Harper decision. Another tactic he used was attempting to appeal to Republicans in key states to quietly put a thumb on the scales. A number of key states flipped Democratic in the midterms, so there are fewer Republicans for him to appeal to. And he's literally about to be indicted for doing that, so people will be on high alert for repeat behavior. And then the final tactic was the attempt on January 6th to stop or reverse Biden's final certification in Congress. This time, however, Trump's VP, Mike Pence, won't be the one overseeing the certification. It'll be Biden's VP, Kamala Harris, which closes out that avenue for Trump to attempt to overturn the election results. There's also the helpful fact that Trump is not the president, so there's no transfer of power to be had in the event that Biden wins again. Keeping the status quo is much easier than peacefully transferring power. And yet, even so, after the 2021 insurrection, we still managed to transfer power. So I'm grasping onto those wisps of hope for dear life, okay? Despite the fact that some journalists are worried that without these quasi-legal avenues for Trump to use to try to overturn the 2024 election, he'll opt instead for a more overtly revolutionary approach. As Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who studies 20th century populism and fascist leaders, said, it takes prosecution and conviction to deflate their personality cults. Which then begs the question, could Trump still be elected president if he's a convicted criminal? I made a whole video about this, but while it's unprecedented for someone to become president while actively incarcerated, it doesn't appear to be technically unconstitutional. There are only 3 requirements to be president. You must be born in the United States, over 35, and a resident of the US for at least 14 years. Candidates with criminal convictions have run in the past. And socialist Eugene V. Debs, who you'll remember helped organize the largest strike in history in the late 1800s, ran for president while in federal prison in Atlanta as the nominee of the Socialist Party in 1920. He was convicted for violating the Espionage Act, which Trump is also charged with. He won 3% of the vote, which is pretty good for a third-party candidate. And given how much Trump has gained in the polls since his indictments, there's a very possible world in which Trump runs for president from prison, and a less probable but still possible world in which Trump is elected president while serving serving time in a federal penitentiary. That being said, there is one pesky hangup in the 14th Amendment, which prevents anyone from running for office who has taken an oath of office and thereafter engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the country, which makes Jack Smith's prosecution all the more pivotal truly for American history, because if he's found guilty of instigating that January 6th insurrection, it could bar him from running for office again. Absent that conviction, scholars have been weighing in on whether Trump could pardon himself. The general answer seems to be that he could try, but it would be challenged in court and likely overturned. Plus, a presidential pardon only applies to federal cases. The criminal case against him involving the Stormy Daniels hush money is a state case. And in the event that he serves jail time for that case, which is unlikely but possible, Congress could invoke the 25th Amendment to impeach him for being unable to perform his duties, because he'll be in prison. Either way, in the event that Trump wins the election in 2024, we would be in for a lengthy series of court battles that could upend our stability and make us seem even weaker on a global scale than we already are thanks to his first presidency. So friends, it doesn't look great. Please go vote. And if you liked this video, you might also like my recent video about how the religious right ruined everything. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, including my newest patrons, and an extra special shout out to my multi-platinum patron, 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 yourself, consider joining me over on Patreon today. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.